Needham 1. 1 Roger. 521. Starting a card for a parking problem. And for your 23. Yes, that's for Oregon 28. Come on, truck when you're ready. Go ahead. Line truck, White Lincoln X-ray 985, should come back up ahead. So you had 2000. Patrick Spalding. 10-4. If you can just put a little note in the, something like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on a vehicle so they can remove it. Rockingham 505 and 50 still is in case for Athens, complainant, soon to be ex, slashed her tires and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return. Forgive that's a 32. 10-4. You're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Did you copy the 505? Yeah, 4. Look at that. No, 3 in Depot Street. Truck away entering 5. 7435. 10-4. 10-4. Can you go 643 again? 143. You go with that 43 you had. I didn't hear any, but it just looks like we do. 10-4, I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabana Circle or to the subject's address. Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that found property case, and I'll be 76 to the Williams Road address to see if I can find the alert. 10-4. 449, 1120. And 449, 1121, thank you. 10-4. Code 4. Alert. Alright, 535. Yeah, that's a great color. 535. Should be. You guys know if our woman fucked into a house. I'll slide up that way. Caller is now been able to close the front door. He's now pounding on the door, trying to get himself. About 5 foot, long dark hair, got tie-dye shirt on, and number 21 is on.
Switch is on, here comes the throttle. Chevy breakers in. We have separation. Inboard and outboard, they're on. We're coming forward with the side stick. Looks good. I've got a blowout. Neighbor 3. Engines out. Can't hold altitude. Correction. Alpha 4 is off. Track collectors emergently. Flight call. I can't hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. We have breaking news. I am waiting for the copy of the warrant to gather Karen's phones that were taken last week. So as soon as I get that, I'm going to go over that on the air with you. But in the meantime, we do have a very good encapsulation of that from reporter Ted Daniels of Fox 25. So we'll come back to that. But there's some other stuff that I want to go over today. So let's go over it first. Just kind of a conversation, a little different than some of the stuff that I've usually had with you guys. A little bit risky for me to go down this road. I don't want to lose people. My channel's not that big. Can't afford to lose people that get mad at me. And because this is going to cross just a little bit into politics, not in a partisan way, there's that risk. Think about Thanksgiving. Let's say you're at one of those years where there's a lot of people at your house for dinner. I don't know if you guys have a lot of people at your house, or maybe even a wedding where there's a lot. You go to a wedding and you're seeing a lot of your family, and you got that crazy uncle that's good with the kids. He's good helping out with the dishes, and he's good with his own family. He's a great dad or a great whatever, but he has opinions that maybe you don't agree with. But you still know he's a great guy. So you don't hold it against him. And that's really how it really should be. If you're at a wedding with your family, it's obviously not going to be the case that everybody there has 100% the same belief on every issue, right? And that's good, right? We don't really want to live in a world where everybody agrees 100% on everything. So take some of the things that I'm going to discuss today and please just say this is just his opinion. And think about it this way. Let's say we want to discuss any particular topic. It could be, let's just say something innocent, sports. We want to discuss the New England Patriots. And there's 10 aspects of it we discuss, and I'm wrong on 9 of them, and you're right on 9 of them. But there's one issue on the Patriots that maybe I'm right at, or maybe I say something interesting. Look at it that way, okay? If there's a chance that I might be right on something or have a point on something, say, okay, I've got something out of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about things like foreign policy and global affairs and stuff like that. And look, I like to say that I'm just a bartender and I'm only an expert at making Bloody Marys, but I am someone that got my degree in history and have studied these things because they're interesting to me all my life. And I'm older. I'll be 58 in May. So I do have a knowledge base that I'm working off here. That doesn't mean I'm right, but just please go with me on that. Give me a couple of degrees of benefit of the doubt that I'm not just making stuff up at least. And then in terms of how you interpret what my opinion or my analysis, that's okay. You're going to have your own ideas on this, and that's fine. All right. So we'll come back to Karen Reed. But I want to just, again, I'm being careful because it's politics, but if you had to sum up my core beliefs when it comes to politics, it really comes in one simple word, and that's freedom. But that's so most of us would probably say the same thing, right? But it definitely is an emphasis of mine. Am I a libertarian? In some ways, yes, but a lot of libertarians kind of go too far or a little bit on the crazy side. And I do also believe that there is a role for government. So I'm not laissez-faire, which is, if you remember that from your high school history textbook, I do believe there's a vital role for safety nets. In fact, I'm only alive talking to you right now because of the healthcare safety net. I've never collected a dime from the government. However, I do have healthcare provided by the state, and my healthcare is extremely expensive, and I wouldn't be here without it. So maybe that, maybe I'm sure there's plenty of people listening right now who say, "Damn that healthcare! I wish he wasn't here." Okay, but I mean, giving you my beliefs, I've always believed there's a role. I don't know what it is. I'm not, there are complications involved with mass healthcare. The universal healthcare system in Britain has a lot of problems, and the same within Canada. So that's a whole other discussion. I'm not going to have that here. But my core beliefs, I do believe you want to see the working man and working families supported and do well. You want to have solid wages. You want to have a good economy that gives all people a chance to find their dream. Um, in addition to the economy, and a lot of things drive the economy, including big businesses. But where my heart is with the small businesses. And so sometimes a lot of these issues come into conflict with each other. So the minimum wage, you may say, hey, let's give everybody a $20 an hour minimum wage. But it's a complicated issue because the reality when you do that is that small businesses are going to be able to hire less people. But it not only impacts those small businesses, but it means there are less entry level jobs for people. Again, I don't want to debate minimum wage, but just to say that these issues are complicated and we should be open to discussion on them because in many of these issues, there are no easy solutions and there really are multiple sides to the debate. And I think it's important to hear other people on that. Um, I think most of us in this culture have a pretty good shared group of core values, similar to the ones that I just said. And where we differ is on how to best achieve those things. But it's pretty nice that we do generally have that core set of values. Most of us do believe in democracy and the idea that everybody should have the right to vote. I don't think there's anybody really seriously left that doesn't believe, as it was for the first half of this country's history, where women couldn't vote, for instance, or Black people. I don't think there's no serious element left that we have a core belief system. Everybody accepts that was the wrong way to do it. And so I think it's good that there is a commonality that we can all kind of, say that we hold this together. So what you want to do is try to look at these things and avoid partisanship. And what I mean by that is that so you have that you think those are your values. We all agree that that's my values, that's your values. And now maybe over time you come to choose a side. You're a Democrat or you're a Republican, right? You're a conservative or you're a liberal. And the type of partisanship that I'm talking about that's a problem is that now once you've chosen a side, people tend to think that the other side is all evil. So you get that problem with demonization and villainization, and then you misunderstand their motives and their beliefs, and you start thinking they're bad people when they may just be people that think there's a different way to do it. And then you tend to process everything through a partisan lens. So you tend to look at so whatever your side is, most of those people are the good people, and most of the other people on the other side are bad people. But I think it's a mistake to look at it that way. Again, going back to the Thanksgiving dinner table or that wedding where your family's at, there are people at that table that disagree with you on politics or on issues that are not only good people, but just as good as you and me. Okay, they're just as good as you. And you know that because they're your family member. So it makes it a little easier for you to look past their quirks, the things that you might disagree with them on. But with strangers, you might tend to forget that. And just so it's easier to not see that person that has a different belief system than you, or they may mostly still have the same core beliefs, but they believe things should be done differently. It's easy to say, well, that person's a bad person. And that's a mistake. And the reality is a lot of these issues are very complicated. So it would be helpful to hear the other side, because there is going to be an issue where you're wrong or where I'm wrong, because none of us bats 100% on any of this stuff. So you're going to do a much better job of getting there. We all will if we listen to each other on these kind of issues. You know, for an example, right now there's a lot of problems in the Middle East. We just Iranian proxies. Proxies are groups that are in Yemen, or in this case, probably in Iraq, who are they're they have their own agenda. It could be tribal, it could be religious. And in the case of Iraq, it's usually going to be religious. The majority of the population in Iraq is Shia or Shiite, and that's the same as Iran. But Iraq is also pretty well split. There's a very strong Sunni population. And for 1,000 years, the Sunnis and the Shia have been at war with each other. And a lot of what happens in the Middle East breaks down that way. So these proxies that are in Iraq, that are supported by Iran and are armed by Iran, they fired a drone that hit a U.S., let's call it a base, an outpost, I think they called it, in Jordan. 3 American soldiers died, and I think 25 were wounded. And to me, it's important to look at how we got where we got in the Middle East in a nonpartisan way. So why are we in Jordan? Why are we in Iraq? Well, we're there because George W. Bush brought us there. Now, again, we look at our leaders and we want them to be good and decent. That seems to be a value that we want in the people that we elect, and a president or congressman. George W. Bush is a decent man. I think he loves his country. Nobody's done more for Africa, believe it or not, than George W. Bush. He's revered over there. Did it quietly, didn't do it particularly in fighting AIDS. And it's even Bono from U2 ended up having, a very liberal guy, ended up having to give him credit for it. And at no point did George Bush ever look out for credit for this, because he's doing it because he believes it's the right thing to do. I think anybody who looks at it objectively says George W. Bush and his family are decent people. George W. Bush became very close with the Obamas, and he's particularly close with Michelle. And I think the Obamas are also decent people. So these are decent people that have a different opinion on politics or on policy and things like that. But they're able to put that past them and realize that there's still decent people there. But again, you also have to look, just because someone is a decent person doesn't mean that their policies have a good effect. I think most of us, or many of us would, especially older people, would recognize that Jimmy Carter is a decent man, but his policies were not effective. I think most of us would look at Bill Clinton and say, here's a guy who's probably not all that decent of a man, but that maybe in a lot of ways did a decent job as a president. And, we can all argue at that, but these are just examples. Now, George W. Bush brought us into war in Iraq. It was his choice. He was convinced of this by the neocons. But we shouldn't have misunderstandings about what the objective was. It was not war for oil. It was not war for empire building. And this is the problem when you villainize the people on the other side. It never had anything to do with that. The neocons convinced George W. Bush after 9/11 that Iraq was an opportunity to remake the Middle East, which was kind of the last outpost, the main source of terror, because it's an area that is resistant to democracy, culturally resistant, but by their opinion, culturally ready for democracy if you just got rid of the dictators. And they looked at Iraq and they said, you have the legal opportunity because Saddam Hussein signed a peace deal at the end of the Gulf War, and he was violating that. So you had a UN resolution that would justify an invasion of Iraq. You had an opportunity in the sense that here's where oil comes in. It does have a lot of oil wealth, and that wealth could be the basis for building Iraq, for rebuilding it after war, and to building it into a strong economy that could be a productive place in the center of the map of the Middle East. And if you had democratic institutions there, What George W. Bush wanted to do was do what his father's generation did in Germany and in Japan. Now, those two also were countries that were autocratic. They had long autocratic traditions. Germany had a brief democratic tradition in the 20s, the Weimar Republic, but it failed and it led to Hitler. But we did manage after World War II. And when I say we, really, most of the credit goes to Germany and Japan itself. But we did manage to help those countries become what they are now, which is bastions of freedom that respect civil rights, bastions of democracy, and basically good actors on the world stage and powerful economies. So the world is enriched by what we managed to achieve there at the end of World War II, and not trying to keep those countries down. In fact, it could have been done the wrong way. So after World War I, in the Versailles Treaty, we kept Germany down, and that ultimately led to the rise of Hitler. So we learned from that mistake and said, we're not going to do that here. Now, we were partly motivated by the Cold War too. We wanted to strengthen those countries because they were now aligned with us against the Soviet Union. But so things are complicated. This is what George W. Bush wanted to do in Iraq, and it was never a good strategy. And I said this back then, and I say it now, because Iraq is not in any way equivalent or comparable to what the potential was in Germany and Japan. Iraq culturally is not aligned with the West. Japan had become aligned with the West as it industrialized for decades. Iraq was not interested in democracy, and it's not interested in our concept of human rights. I hope it is someday, but it's a longer road for Islamic countries. That's their culture has a different value system. It's more tribal. I'm not passing judgment on it. I'm saying it's different. So to try to turn Iraq into Canada is a mistake. But also, more importantly, Iraq is surrounded by other hostile, competitive countries that would not want a prosperous, democratic Iraq, particularly Iran. Now, the main thing, you could look at the board and just say, by invading Iraq and trying to set up a democracy there and just say, okay, we'll leave them alone now and things will be good. You're just handing that country over to Iran, or at least large portions of it, because Iran is a bigger, more prosperous, it's a more powerful country, more populated country, and it's Shiite, and so a large, long-time repressed majority in Iraq was Shiite, and so they were always going to have those strong connections there. And this is what fueled, after the invasion of Iraq, why we initially, for years, couldn't really get that under control. And eventually you had to have the surge, which was effective. But at the end of the day, now only time will tell if Iraq can evolve into, it took time in Germany and Japan too. So can they evolve into a Western style democracy, maybe have an Islamic flavor, fine, but can they respect human rights? Can they have a stable democracy? Can they get rid of the tribal system that they have there? I'm skeptical, and I think what I said back then is it's next to impossible to do that. And you're always going to have other countries on the border that are competing, and it becomes this Game of Thrones kind of thing. So Turkey, Syria, primarily. So at the end of the day, you were going to have an area that was difficult to tame. And eventually you saw ISIS rise up out of that. Now, part of that was because Barack Obama was a disinterested president. He, after the surge, finally, where common sense, where the Bush administration went in, knocked down the rebels, but also began getting the tribes to work together. But in order to maintain that, it required a continued active interest by the United States. And Barack Obama just wasn't interested in it. Obama is a naturally brilliant man, maybe the most intelligent president by natural aptitude that we've ever had, extremely. And we've had a lot of very high aptitude presidents. But he just wasn't interested. And so it got let go, and ISIS rose up in that. And then Trump, who strongly believes that no U.S. troops should ever be in other countries because he's a child of the Vietnam era, was reluctant, but he was forced to go in and help knock down ISIS. But as a result, you have these outposts in Syria, in Iraq, and in Jordan. This was the situation that George Bush Sr. wanted to avoid in the first Gulf War. We went on the mission of knocking Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And once that was achieved, there was a dramatic moment when the U.S. forces were destroying the bulk of the Iraqi army, called the Republican, his elite forces were called the Republican Guard, and were destroying them on a highway as they were fleeing back into Iraq. And it was a turkey shoot. It was called a turkey shoot. And we could have chased them all the way back to Baghdad, and we could have knocked out Saddam Hussein right then and there. And George Bush Sr. put a stop to it. And he was right. Many Republicans, most Republicans criticized him for that for many years afterwards, some still to today. But he was right, because this was a man who had been head of the CIA, who was had fought in World War II. So he was a very seasoned person who understood how the world really works and has a more practical approach about it, and understood that knocking over Saddam Hussein meant having to rebuild that government, and it would have meant leaving troops there more or less permanently. And that's where we are now. And that's what he wanted to avoid. That's what Trump had tried to avoid. And we're finding it's difficult to protect these troops in an era when people can load bombs onto a drone that costs $20,000 or $100,000 and send it into these areas. In order to protect it, it takes very advanced and expensive air defense systems. And it's only a matter of time before something gets through. And in this case, it did get through. And now what do you do? Are we facing the possibility of a major widespread war in the Middle East? Well, if so, the roots of that goes back to the decision of George W. Bush to invade Iraq, which he did for noble reasons. He thought he could rebuild the Middle East and turn it into something that he looked at the roots of terrorism and said it comes from people living in countries where there is no democracy and they don't have a voice, and many people don't have opportunity, right or wrong. And some of that was right. But the idea that we could go in and rebuild that was tomfoolery, really. And it's led to where we are today. But it's important to be able to discuss these things in a nonpartisan way, and, so people like my friend Dave McGrath, who end up fighting in these wars because people like George Bush made stupid decisions. And the neocon movement, if you look it up, has its roots in liberalism. They're basically liberals that turned conservative. So they still have the liberal conceptions of the world, that all cultures are the same, and that the kind of naive conceptions that all cultures are the same. And if you just throw off the shackles of dictatorship and go in, the people will embrace democracy. And so, but what they decided to do was, the neocon twist on that is, all right, all peoples will embrace democracy if you give them the chance. So what the Americans need to do is be a little more aggressive in going out there, being active in the world and overthrowing dictatorships to give them the chance. It's a naive idea. All right. It's unfortunately not all cultures. Most cultures don't really value the human rights in the way that we do. It's just a reality of the situation. Now, we hope that the tide of history is bringing countries more in that direction. Only time will tell, though. We don't really know that. It's naive to think that that's automatic. And there's just too many countries in the world where that doesn't seem to be happening, and people don't actually even seem to want it. In the early part of the Obama years, there was a revolution in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood was a large force behind that. And I remember Anderson Cooper over there leading the charge, basically to put pressure on the White House to help. And as a result, the Obama White House toppled or helped topple Mubarak, and with the goal that they would have fair elections in Egypt. They did have fair elections in Egypt, but it was the last elections that they would ever have there. And helping to overthrow that democracy was Barack Obama. And he did the right thing. Because the thing is the Muslim Brotherhood won overwhelmingly, and they won on a platform of this will be the last election, and we're going to establish an Islamic regime. And that's what they were in the process of doing. And as part of that, they were persecuting minorities, Coptic Christians, and other sects there. You were in the early stages of a genocide. And the only way that was stopped was to overthrow the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood government, throw that, I forget the name of the leader, throw him in jail. And what took over was what had been there before, the Egyptian military faction. That's because Egypt, the majority of Egyptians don't want democracy. They want theocracy. Maybe that's their right. I don't know. But it's not an automatic thing that people want to have elections every 4 years. People have different value system. So that's just the reality. And this is a theme of this episode today. I want people to start thinking about reality. And in my opinion, it's a problem. All right. We tend to, human beings, think of the world in terms of narrative. And we like to have these expressions, these maxims that help us think we have a grip on things, like just follow the money. It's all about the money, and those have a use. But the world is more complicated than that. And if you try to break it down to one or two maxims or four or five, you're really not getting an accurate grip on reality, which is more complicated. Yes, for instance, money, a lot of things are about the money, but there are other things that motivate human beings, such as love, family, tribal issues, religion, ideology. And so it's not all about the money. And I remember even earlier, maybe say 5 or 6 years ago, we were in the free agent era where, for instance, Gordon Hayward was becoming a free agent, and people were speculating as to whether he'd come to the Celtics. And most of the people I knew, both conservative and liberal, and yes, I have friends of both, were saying, no, he'll never come here, because to do so, the way the NBA rules were, he'd have to leave about $8 or $9 million on the table. Excuse me a second. And nobody does that because it's all about the money. But I said it's crazy because, yes, $8 or $9 million is a lot of money. However, the contract he was going to sign was going to be a total for about $130 million. So he was going to sign $132 million instead of the $140 that he could have signed to stay with Utah. Now, I may be slightly off in these numbers because it was a long time ago, but you get the point. There's a point, if you're going to sign for $132 million, at that level of money, you're thinking of other factors. Where do you want your kids to go to school? Where do you want to live? What team do you want to play for? Do you have a chance to win a championship? In the case here, he seems to have wanted to come back to play for his college coach, Brad Stevens. So if you tried to understand how people think in the NBA, free agents, and your only guiding principle was it's all about the money, then you misunderstood what was going to happen. And I didn't. I knew that there was a good chance he would come to Boston. I predicted he would for those reasons, because at that level, he still was going to make a ridiculous amount of money to come here. So this is where maxims are important, these rule of thumbs kind of things, these bumper stickers that we have about life, but you can't overestimate them. You can't overuse them. So I was just as a little having a little interesting, I challenged Chat GPT. So for instance, another maxim all about the money. Marxists like to do this, right? So it's all about labor and capital. It's oversimplifying, and those things there's a role for those things, but it's oversimplifying. So I challenge ChatGPT. So what are some popular maxims? So you guys will recognize these, every one of them. This is the first on the list. Every cloud has a silver lining. Yeah. I think it's a useful expression because something bad happens, but you're looking for something good that comes out of it. But the reality is sometimes as bad shit happens and there's not much good you can take out of it. So you have to look for the good. The point of that is not that the bad thing that happens was good, is to look, but that's to actually look for the good in any situation. Just to make the best out of it. Better to be alone than in bad company. That's an interesting thing too, because obviously it's not literally true. Sometimes it's better to be in bad company. It depends on how bad, right? You don't want to be hanging out with a group of serial killers. But it's a useful maxim. Birds of a feather flock together. That's true, and that's one of the things that we're talking about here. Is when it comes to looking at idea. This is one of the problems we're running into here with the internet in the modern age, is that as people get their news or their opinions on things, they only go to the side that they already agree with. And we all do it to some degree. There's a tendency to want to go to those people that to that side, to that information source that you already agree with. And that's something that has become that's human nature, but it's become a real problem in the era of the internet, because you can now tailor and not only can you go to the sites that already confirm what you already believe, getting that confirmation bias, but now even worse, the algorithms, the search algorithms, or even just the search engine that is applied to, for instance, say Microsoft Edge or to Chrome, that they're going to put up little ads on articles that you might want to click on. The algorithms are studying what your interests are, and they're going to put up things that they think you're more likely to click on. So you're getting more and more of that confirmation bias. And we do this in our social group circles too. It's more common with progressives, but it's common on both sides. People tend to only want to be around other people that already agree with them. Now, it's worse with progressives because they tend to demonize the other side. Conservatives tend to look at liberals often fondly, but as a little bit wacky. So they don't think they're bad people. They just think they're misguided. But I'm going to call them liberals, but because in many ways I consider myself a liberal, but I will say that I'm an old school liberal. But modern progressives, and liberals are like this always too, but even back in my day too, but they tend to demonize anybody on the other side. So if you think that taxes should be lower, it's because you're greedy. It's not because it's not. They never would think that maybe it might have a better effect on the economy. And it's like this in every issue. So everything that you think, there must be some evil motive behind it. So that's why they don't want to be around anybody that's from the other side. And so they get more and more this kind of, living in a glass, they live in this tunnel vision, where they're just not exposed to other ways of thinking. And over time, they really get more and more disconnected from reality. And that's the theme of tonight's show. The next one on the list was blood is thicker than water. Yeah. But, of course, not always. Sometimes if you've been in a war and you've been to battle with people, they become your brothers. They're not blood brothers, but they are your brothers, and you'll have a bond that they'll be stronger than you are than will be with most of your family. Even rats desert a sinking ship. It's there's a tendency for that. I had a lot of people desert my ship when I started asking questions this summer. There was I think I lost 800 subscribers in over a day or two. People that loved me for a couple months and were donating money, as soon as they started hearing me asking questions or challenging what they believed, they got angry, and suddenly they started so they definitely deserted the ship. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That was I'm sure it was popular before this, but that became made famous by The Godfather, Part one of my favorite movies. And it's interesting though, and there is a lot of truth to it. I think, but that's the value in that, is that you have to remind yourself to do it, because your tendency will not want to be around your enemies. But it's a valuable thing to be close to them, and maybe not have them know what your feelings are, but just close enough that you know that. And really, what it's more is potential enemies, um, just so that you're able to see when they're going to turn. And that was the thing in The Godfather. They kept saying it's all about business, but the truth was, it never was about business. It was about trying to understand people, and that people are going to act in their own interests. And Michael was different than the father, because he believed it was all about business, and he took that too much to heart. All of the other the people that he eventually surrounded himself with, it was just about business for them, and so they had no problem betraying him. Even his brother betrayed him in the end. But Michael's father, the Godfather, the original Godfather, was different, because people were loyal to him. They had powerful feelings of loyalty. So you were much less likely to get someone to betray. Now, at the end, he was betrayed, but not by someone that close to him, you know. So it's just it's interesting. Yeah, that's movie stuff. I won't bore you with too many movie topics, but I love movies. So maybe we should do a channel. Maybe we should do an episode where we just talk about movies, and you guys can tell me what you think about it. The next one on the list is a couple more. No man can serve two masters. Yeah, and that's just the idea, is that everyone really has one focus point, and if you spread yourself after two, it can lead to trouble. But again, it's just a maxim. Obviously, in reality, we have multiple things that are important to us: family, friends, belief systems, ideology, our own financial interests. There's all kinds of stuff. Romance. No man is an island. Everyone needs other people around them. But there's a lot of truth in that. There are people that don't need much around them, though. So but pretty generally, no man is an island. Opposites attract. That's an interesting one, and that kind of contradicts what I was just saying here, or one of the other maxims, the idea that people tend to stick to their own kind. But I think this is obviously mostly talking about romance, and there's a limitation. You don't see, it's definitely not an ideology. Like, you will never see a progressive woman be interested in a conservative man, and nowadays, or even a moderately liberal man. They're not going to be. So there's two more on the list. There is no honor among thieves. And I'm not, it's an interesting saying. I think the main thing by that is, if you're forming partnerships, relationships, business relationships, friendships, if the person you form this relationship with shows a tendency to screw other people, sooner or later, they're going to screw you. So I think that's where the wisdom is in that. And then the last one is, when it rains, it pours. It does seem to, and there is the old idea that good luck and bad luck comes in threes. I don't know if that's kind of similar to the rule of three. It's not exactly the same, but interesting. All right. Another maxim, or another way people can look at things. So back to world affairs, is the war in Ukraine. There are some people that say, if we don't stop the Russians in Ukraine, we'll have to fight them in Germany. And I don't think that's true. In fact, I think that we may have thought that was true, reasonably a few years ago, but it doesn't seem likely to be true now, because they're really struggling to defeat Ukraine. So I don't think that's probably true. Another maxim related to that is, the only way to end a war is to win a war. That sounds good, but isn't true. The reality is that most wars historically didn't end by anybody winning. There was not a clear win. You won battles and lost battles, but at the end of the day, two sides. When it makes more sense for them to make a peace, they make a peace. We go with that maximum. Kind of comes from really just the modern American model of World War I and World War II, that we won those wars and that's the only way to end it. But the reality is the Korean War ended and there's been no peace deal has been signed and Korea is still divided. That's not ideal, but it's better that it went that way than for us to have been continued fighting over the last 75 years. So so nobody won that war, but peace is preferable, even though it sucks to be in North Korea. But as far as Ukraine, myself, I do think it's important to keep arming the Ukrainians and to continue this fight. Because I do think they have become a people now that definitely wants and values freedom and Western values. And so I do think they deserve that, as if we can give it without having to fight there ourselves. And I do think there's also a practical strategic value in helping them, if not win, at least hold their own, because there are NATO allies that border that, Poland and the Baltic republics. And those are NATO countries. So if Russia does attack those countries, say 5-10 years down the road, we will be obligated to send American troops to defend them. So I do not believe at all in sending a single American soldier to Ukraine. It's not a NATO country, and there isn't that much of a strategic interest to justify it. So I would be against that. And I was against NATO membership for Ukraine. I believe that the mistake was made under the Obama administration to really push that idea, and that antagonized Putin to some degree and forced him to act. Now, I don't think it's as simple as saying that's the only reason he acts. No, he definitely wants to rebuild the core Soviet Union areas that they controlled before. And there were geographical reasons to want to control Ukraine too. Russia has no natural barriers to invasion. And so controlling Ukraine would give them that strategic, that's an area they've long tried to control those, because Russia's been invaded many times. But I don't know how, I don't think Russia seriously worries about invasion from the West. Maybe they do, but I don't think so. But I do think that flirting with the idea of giving them NATO membership at least gave Putin, made it easier for him to get the support of the other hardliners in Russia, which enabled his invasion to a large degree. So I think it was a mistake to do that. But I do think that we have to support Ukraine, and we can support it with, right now they're being held up by the Republicans in Congress, and I would argue for the wrong reasons. It's become partisan. Ukraine. So back in 2016, Trump, because he's a child of the Vietnam era, said, I don't believe in supporting Ukraine, and I don't believe in supporting Syria with troops. He saw what happened in Vietnam, and he didn't want to see a repeat of that. Remember, he grew up during the Vietnam era. And when he said that, the result of this was that the deep state, I don't want to read too much into what that is not an actual organization called the deep state, but the idea of the intel agencies that are career people, that they spend their time looking at maps and trying to figure out how to win the game. And they had their eyes on Syria. They and Hillary Clinton were the ones that greenlighted the revolution in Syria that led to 1 million deaths and a huge refugee crisis. They did so in the name of Arab Spring and stuff like that, but it was always a bad idea. And she did it because she wanted a feather in her cap for when she ran for president again in 2016. And Trump campaign saying, I'm going to undo that stuff. I don't want American boys in these situations. And I don't think there's any question. I followed it very closely that there were strong elements of the intel apparatus that tried to prevent Trump from getting elected in 2016 and then tried to cripple his presidency right before he even took office. It's beyond dispute, really, at this point. Their motives were not partisan. They aren't Democrats. Their motives were, in that case, to prevent Trump from keeping us out of Ukraine and keeping us out of Syria. Now, also, there were Clinton operatives that were directly involved in this. So there was an alliance between Democrat operatives working for Clinton and intel apparatus people and FBI people that wanted to make this happen. They undermined our democracy. And that doesn't, you don't have to accept Trump as a good president or a good person to admit that. It's just the evidence. Again, I just follow the evidence. So in terms of Biden, I think Biden has done a good job on Ukraine, on trying to thread the needle of supporting them without sending U.S. troops and without so antagonizing Russia that they might launch nuclear weapons at us. And they do have a mass amount of nuclear weapons that they could launch at us or at an ally. They could destroy. They have a missile called Satan II that has that I think carries a payload of 4 large nuclear weapons, huge bombs that would wipe England out just with one of those missiles getting through. That doesn't mean we should back down to Russia, but at the same time, you have to have some reasonable caution when it comes to your approach to antagonize them. And I think Biden has done a pretty good job threading that needle. There's a lot of other areas that I don't think he's done a good job, but I think in that area he's done a good job. So let me take another sip, and I want to get back to the war and reality. Be patient. We'll get to the Karen Read stuff, I promise. And hopefully, I still have not been sent the warrant yet, but we do have Ted Daniels' detailed article on it. So we'll go with that. So the war on reality. This was a little bit before the pandemic that met in Cambridge every couple of weeks. And in that group was some really smart people. There was a lot of professors in it. There was a Harvard professor in the group. And as you can imagine, I think everybody in the group was progressive. But you avoid politics. They were good people and some really good writers. Now, on one particular day, so on each get together, we would go over the work of 2 of the writers in the group. So on this particular day, the two people that were scheduled for us to go over their work, one of them was late and eventually they didn't show. But so because of that, there was a delay and we were waiting to begin the meeting. And so we're at a Panera Bread and drinking coffee. And then suddenly the topic turned to transgenders in sports. And I'm sympathetic with someone who is a transgender and has been born with equipment that they think is the wrong equipment. Okay. It's a real thing that happens. It's not super rare. It's somewhat, I don't know if common's the right word, but it's not super rare. And I sympathize with that situation. And those, someone that's in that boat has just as much right to live a happy, productive life and has just as much talent to contribute in that way. And so for us to support those people in that, I think it's great. I think we should. And I think it's great. But it doesn't justify a war on reality. So one of the progressive women in the group started telling us that there was no biological difference when it comes to sports or anything between men and women, between boys and girls. And this went on for like 15 minutes. And I guess you guys would be proud of me because I didn't argue with her. I didn't say anything. Eventually I just turned away and tried to talk to someone else. But she said that if boys and girls, if only we didn't separate them in grade school in the sports, if we made them play together, that by the time they got to high school, there'd be no difference. That all of this was social. So, and on the basketball team, instead of having the men's and the girls, boys and the girls, you'd have basketball team, and according to her, there'd be no difference. You would have, just if you let things naturally go, you'd have the same amount of boys and the same amount of girls, just based on talent, not because you would say this team has to have half girls and half boys, but just if you let the cream automatically rise to the surface, that without the interference of socialization, of forcing them into separate groups, sorry, the dogs are barking, that without doing that, you will have equality. Now, it's absurd. There are real differences between men and women when it comes to strength, when it comes to size. And no one is saying that you wouldn't respect people that can compete despite that, but I don't even really, it's not worth wasting a lot of time explaining that. But yet, it has to be explained to people who have convinced themselves that reality is different. I want to just give you an example right here. This is an article. All right. All right. A Harvard Medical School department Twitter account claimed that not only all those who give, the Harvard Medical School claimed that not all those who give birth are women. And this is not an isolated thing to Harvard. This is now going on in a lot of medical schools. The department took to social media to share a tweet that referred to women as birthing people and claimed that not all who give birth are women. And this has been, they've asked people, they've had some of these schools up, their leaders up before Congress, and they'd say, Professor, is it possible for a male to give birth? And they won't say no. They won't say no. So this is what I'm saying, the war on reality. And, we've seen this with, oh God, I can't remember her name, the person who wrote Harry Potter. But she's a lifelong, ardent, outspoken feminist. But she's also saying, well, listen, full respect to transgender people, and everybody's different. But she's saying a transgender woman isn't really exactly the same as a biologically born woman. And, I don't know what type of language we should use on that. And you want to be as sensitive as you can to people, but you don't want to have a war on reality. And it's the same thing when you take J.K. Rowling. Thank you, Selena. And it's the same thing when you take biological males and put them in, share the locker rooms with kids in grade school and in high school. Now, there's a reason boys and girls, our society has evolved to keep them with separate bathrooms and separate showers. And it's for the safety of the girls. I am not in any way suggesting that transgenders are dangerous or more dangerous than anybody else. No. I'm suggesting that it might not be the safest thing to put biological males in with girls in that setting, in a shower setting or a bathroom setting. And if there's a safety issue, that is what takes priority over sensitivity issues. The sensitivity issues are important. Okay. If there's a way to do things that reflects their needs, the people's special needs, and they are a kind of special need that they have. If you can do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize somebody else's safety, fine. I have no problem if I'm in a bathroom and a transgender man, so someone who was born a woman but is now identifying as a man, comes in and uses the bathroom. I don't care. I'm not, and I wouldn't treat them any different. I have no problem with them being, if that's where they're more comfortable, because they're not a danger to me. So, but this war on reality is a problem where we're all, we tend to, too many of us are just we're letting ideology determine reality. And that's a mistake. That's dangerous. And it's something we all have to watch for, but just some to more degrees than others. But I mean, all of us tend to have our ideas influenced by preconceptions that we have, and you have to work every day to try to root out those preconceptions. Another example would be, all right, but let's slightly move on. But again, with the war and reality theme, at the end of 2021, Joe Biden had been in office for almost a year, and his people controlled the CDC and the FDA. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control. The COVID vaccines had been around for a year. They had been developed under the Trump administration and effectively distributed by the Biden administration. I am not anti-vax. I was grateful for the vax. As some of you know, I have stage 4 lung cancer. So at my age and at that condition, it made sense for me to want to have to get the vax, to have some immunity in my system. I was always against the idea of forcing people to take it. And so in that December of 2021, by that time, I had both my vaxes, and initially it was a 2-round shot, and then a booster in October. But Omicron was widely spreading by December, and the president and the CDC were still telling people that if enough people would just get this vaccine, it would eradicate the pandemic. Okay, that was wrong, but it wasn't just that it was wrong. We now know it was wrong. It was known then by every common sense person in the world, because you could see all around you every day people in your life that had all the vaccines and that were getting COVID. But they were not allowed to say that at the CDC. And Joe Biden was still going around. I don't know if he's lying, because he may have been just fooled. Now, a few weeks later, my family finally got COVID, and I had it too. And I had a very, very difficult case. Almost had to be hospitalized. And to this day, I still have hearing loss, and who knows what other effect that it's had on me. But also, my parents seem to have had heart damage from it. We've all had COVID again since then. But this was not just a matter of we weren't sure about the science. No, because while the CDC was still out there saying that everybody has to get the shot and the pandemic will go away, you could see that it was not true. So the science was lying to us. This consensus was lying to us. They had their own little war on reality. And that's just the truth. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. That's just the truth. The scientists at the CDC and the FDA, and now also at every other academic institution at the same time, there was no academics coming out and saying, look, maybe we got this wrong. No, because if they came out and said it, they were going to be silenced. They were going to be socially ostracized by their peers, professionally ostracized, deplatformed off YouTube and off other social media, just for saying what was obvious. And that was that even though you've had the vax, you still can get COVID. It was obvious, but you couldn't say it. So there was a war on reality. The same thing continued where it was kind of obvious that COVID, very good chance that it came out of the labs in Wuhan. Then we now know that lab was doing gain of function by any normal definition of what that is. We're doing gain of function research that was funded by Dr. Fauci's agency, actually. And that's pretty obvious now, but they lied about that and covered it up. So I'm a big science guy. I love science. But you got to be careful about these ideas of science and consensus, and science and trust the science. What is that? There is no God named science. It's out there issuing decrees, as Dr. Fauci kind of liked to imply. And science, like all of our institutions now, are extremely influenced by ideology, whether it's the legal institutions, everything. And increasingly, that ideology is at war with reality, like as I've talked about with the other examples here. So, which leads to the last issue I want to very delicately broach before we get back to the Karen Reed, and that's climate change. All right, listen. The world is warming, and I don't think it's reasonable to doubt at this point that the world is warming, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that human activity probably plays some part in that, although it's not that as easy to distinguish that as you might think, because we are coming out of an era geologically that's known as the Little Ice Age, which started, I'm off the top of my head here, but around 1200 AD. So say about 1,000 years ago, and it went on for several centuries. And we started coming out of that in the 1850s, and we slowly began warming. But it was much colder for several centuries before that. You see these famous, there was these famous carnivals on the Thames River in London, because it froze every winter back then, and it doesn't anymore. But for centuries, it did. And so we're still coming out of that. So we would have been warming anyways. But yeah, it's reasonable. The science behind the greenhouse effect and things like that seems pretty well enough established that there's likely a contribution from human activity. But there is no consensus that disaster is imminent. There's no consensus on that. The media wants to tell you that there is, just like they wanted to tell you that the COVID vaccine would end the pandemic. No, that's ideology influencing this here. Okay. We need to really mistrust anything from science involving consensus if it's impacted by ideology. I know a lot of people are going to be upset with me for saying that, but please believe me, that's just common sense to at least just question some of those things. I'm not saying not to try to do things to fight climate change, to look for alternative energy sources, to worry about it, to study it. I'm not saying, but be wary is all I'm saying. Have that natural skepticism that you would have if you're going to buy a car, and that car dealership, the salesman had tried to sell you a lemon a few years before. You become jaded, right? You develop a little skepticism about that dealership. Have that same thing here, because there's been a lot of misleading stuff by people influenced by this ideology. Now, it's important to look at this. What are we going to do about climate change? Well, if your solution involves dramatically or significantly increasing the price of energy, understand this, that it's just common sense reality that you're going to harm billions of people. All right. And the people that are fighting climate change are forcing very draconian solutions that will significantly increase the cost of energy globally. Now, if you're living in a third world country and your cost of energy goes up 30, 40%, you're living on the margin. So there's a good chance that your family is going to die, or is definitely going to suffer more illness and more extreme wretched poverty. That's just common sense. I could sit there and pull out graphs and stuff and prove it to you, but I don't need to, because it is common sense. That just picture anybody living, even just in this country. If you're living in the margin, you're living on the margin, you're barely above water, and then all of a sudden you increase energy costs. And if you increase energy costs, because everything that's developed in the economy, that creates that inflation on that. So you're increasing the cost of everything in that person's life, in that family's life. You're jeopardizing that family. You're jeopardizing their opportunities for a bright future. You're jeopardizing small businesses that most small businesses barely are above water. And I was a small business owner, and it's very, very different. And when times are good, you're doing okay, but you are going to go through bad times as a small business owner. It's inevitable. And so if all of a sudden you're going to dramatically increase the cost of energy, yeah, more of those businesses are going to go under. But also, the people fighting climate change are actively trying to get rid of chemical fertilizers, ban them, and they did this in I think it's Myanmar. Basically, the UN kind of pushed a dictator to ban chemical fertilizers a couple years ago, and as a result, within a year they had famine, and because of that famine, they had a revolution. But that's just there's your test lab to what's going to happen because now it's a little tougher in this country because things are more balanced. We have conservatives and liberals, so things are more balanced. But in Europe, where it's much more progressive, they're doing things that are going to lead to dramatic increases in the cost of food over there, dramatic increases and shortages of food that in certain environments. Now, obviously, say France. France is a first world country, but there is a lot of poverty there. And those people are going to struggle if food suddenly becomes dramatically harder to get and more expensive. But this is going to affect everybody. Now, if you think that climate change is an impending disaster that's so Hollywood ending terrible and it's so imminent that maybe it makes sense to deliberately do things that are going to force billions of people to live in poverty and maybe hundreds of millions to die. Let's say in this country, it wouldn't be like that. Population of this country is maybe 340 million. We do have a safety net. So I don't think you're going to see tens of millions of people dying on the streets of starvation. No, but you are going to see an extremely different world for children growing up now. They are not going to have opportunity. They're going to live. And if you think this doesn't happen in this country, if you don't have serious consequences for many of our social ills in this country, just look at Detroit when you took away the auto industry. And that looks like the apocalypse there. How much of this country is going to look like that in 10 years? If our policies, so we've actually had a revolution in shale that had nothing to do with the government that led to a dramatic, the biggest in the world, reduction in fossil fuels released into the atmosphere. And it's all because of private industry developing natural gas through shale recovery techniques. However, the environmentalist groups fight the development and the building of any pipeline. There's even a movie up now that's coming out, how to destroy a pipeline, how to blow up a pipeline. And there was a New York Times article out 2 weeks ago that was basically saying, well, maybe that's what needs to be done is blow up these pipelines. These are people they're trying to invite a level of genocide. If you start blowing up pipelines, you're consigning the country to poverty. And it's not some fringy thing for me to say that because pretty much the entire party, the Democrat Party, is built around that concept of extreme measures to fight climate change. Now, fortunately, they're balanced off. Now, again, there are issues that I don't agree with Republicans at all. I think that we should be funding support for Ukraine. I am pro-choice, so I was not pleased with ending Roe versus Wade. There are many things that I don't agree with Republicans on. I tend to lean always towards the side of freedom and opportunity. So whatever gives people, to me, the primary purpose of the government is to protect people's freedoms. But also we want to see a government that is effective at creating opportunities, because opportunity is freedom too. Your freedom when you get out of high school to develop a life, to buy a house, to live on your own, to raise a family, to open a business, those freedoms are impacted by the economy. So that stuff's important too. So I don't believe in, I believe in safety nets also can even make it possible safety nets are playing a role in our freedoms too. So, all right, let's get to the Karen Read case, guys. Thank you for staying with me. And I hope you guys can at least, if you disagree with me, I understand. Just let's politely disagree on these political issues. Keep an open mind. I'm an open book that people want to reach out to me and tell me where I'm wrong. If you're respectful and you want to come on my show and explain where you differ on these things, you're welcome. I believe that it's about dialogue. You should have a dialogue with people. And somewhere I'm wrong and somewhere you're wrong. And if we have a dialogue, we got a better chance of getting through that. All right, now let's pull up the Ted Daniels article on the warrant. I don't think I'm going to check my messages in a second and see if I've actually been sent. All right. All right, you guys got that. Let me just check my messages and see if I've been sent the actual warrant yet. Oh, I do have it. All right. So I will pull that up in a second for you guys. But let's just go through the Ted Daniels part first, though. Let me try to expand this for you guys so you can see it better. All right. So this is from posted today, Ted Daniels from Fox 25. And so he's read through and given a quick synopsis of the warrant that was used to seize Karen Read's phones. Now, despite what many of you guys probably expect, I have mixed feelings on a lot of this stuff. Okay, so let's get to it. All right, reading from the warrant. The search warrant cites probable cause that Read committed witness interference and conspiracy to commit witness intimidation by allegedly working with Aiden Kearney. So that's Karen. Now, I don't know what witness interference is, so maybe we'll have someone on with some legal background that can explain better what that is. I haven't had time to research that. I didn't even know that how does that differ from witness intimidation? How is witness interference? And that's in quotes too. So that is in the report, witness interference. Mass State Police alleges Kearney initially began communicating with Read in April 2023 through a college friend of Read's. That's Natalie, of course. And I've talked about all of that. Natalie's a friend of mine, and she's a good person. And I've talked about all of these texts here. Her goal in releasing this stuff was not to damage Karen. Her basically, this stuff got taken by the state police. They had, I guess, probable cause to take it. I think they did have that. So anyways, alleges Kearney initially began communicating with Read in April. So Turtle Boy's first article was on April 18th. And I've told you guys, that's when the communications began. It was arranged through Jen Altman, who was a longtime Turtle supporter, and who Natalie and Karen had found on social media was already interested in the Karen Read case and was already defending Karen Read. So that's how that marriage happened. And it says she has since flipped sides and is cooperating with the Mass State Police. Read's friend, Natalie, told the police that Karen's attorneys were working with the assistant attorney. I'm sorry, the assistant USA, Josh Levy. So yes, the first attorney, that's what we know as the first U.S. attorney, Josh Levy. And Levy was directly involved in the federal grand jury. Now, how amazing is it that this is being discussed in a warrant? In a warrant. Amazing. So you have the state, for this to be in a warrant, the state police are implying that there's some wrongdoing on the part, or at least suspected wrongdoing in what's going on in the relationship between Josh Levy and Karen Read and her team. That's mind-blowing. Now, I've reported this here for weeks, so it's not that mind-blowing. And if you've been following this channel, you know this stuff. But to see this in an actual warrant is mind-blowing. And I wonder what Josh Levy is thinking right now, if he's just seeing this copy for this. And I wonder what his press conference is going to be, which should be coming soon. Probably next week, but possibly as early as Friday. So on April 23rd, so Natalie texted Kearney, this is in quotes, not public, The feds have been involved longer than anyone is likely guessing. Now, I've reported to you here that I've read to you messages that go back to August of 2022. So, yes, and that Josh Levy was getting directly involved and making an exception, to put it in supposedly his words, but certainly in Karen's words. Kearney's former girlfriend told the police that Karen Reed was interviewed by federal law enforcement. That's pretty amazing. The police alleged that there were 189 calls between Aiden and what they say is Karen Reed's phone. That's not counting the communications that she did on the encryption app called Signal. I've reported this to you guys a long time ago that she began using Signal. And in fact, Natalie had told me about that, and she had described it as, I think, now, that Karen's motive for doing that was that she didn't want the state police reading her messages. Now, that would be perfectly reasonable if the state police are corrupt, right? So I would understand that. But I also think the other way you can look at this is that she didn't want someone to come back and see what she was doing, because Karen has been at the center, let's just say actively for fighting her own defense, but managing social media, reaching out to people, a lot of people, anybody that becomes prominent in social media. Certainly Sean McDonough from the early days, but many other people. And controlling the message, controlling the narrative. The police allege that she took steps to provide Kearney. This is the key one. This is if they're actually, reaching out to the media is not a crime. Reaching out to other people is not a crime. This is where the criminal stuff seems to come in. That she took steps, this is in quote, took steps to provide Aiden non-public information while appearing to be distant and controlling what he can publish publicly. So this is very interesting to me. I actually, I'm not sure about this stuff. There's no question Karen was doing all that. Where I'm not sure is where's the breaking of the law. So that'll be really interesting to see. And I'm not all that confident from having watched the hearings with the state or with Attorney Mello. I'm not all that confident that they'll be able to make this stuff stick. Not even sure if they're doing the right thing. It's tricky. I mean, there's legal, you want to, on the one hand, you want to fight wrongdoing and misinformation, but you always want to protect our rights. So we always have to be careful about the state becoming too heavy-handed with those things. So I don't know. But so for me, when I look at, for instance, witness intimidation, now I could go and quote the laws, and I've done that before on my channel, but just look at this. Like, I like to look at law from a common sense thing, if you and look at it from both sides. So there are different elements that would be needed for there to be witness intimidation, but not something that is protected by the First Amendment and just by our rights. I'll call it the First Amendment, by our rights to free speech, our rights to demonstrate. So to me, there were things that Aiden did journalistically that crossed the line, but that were protected. So I would say calling up the witnesses, it was obnoxious. It was cruel. The real purpose was to make money because it was entertainment for his channel. But you could claim that there was a journalistic purpose. So there's where the First Amendment protects you. So that's a real gray area. But so if Karen gave them those phone numbers or gave them the names of those witnesses, I think the state might try to make a case that that was part of her pattern of controlling events and trying to intimidate them. But I don't know if that's going to stick, because she's giving him stuff. Unless they have a message from her saying, here, take this and go use this to intimidate these people, you're not really proving that motive. She could be just giving them the information on who the people were inside the house, for example, for journalistic purposes in order to get her side of the case out there. So I think that activity might be protected. But where Turtle Boy, to me, one of the truly clear areas that he violated the rule against intimidation was the rolling rally. There was absolutely no journalistic purpose to the rolling rally. And what the actual purpose was also stated on every show, which was to hound these witnesses until the end of time, unless they come clean, and to make their life miserable. That's what we would say every night. Now, that is just another way of saying they have to change their testimony, and I'm going to keep the pressure on them until they do. If that's not witness intimidation, then English doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, words just have to have simple meanings. And where there's nothing in the rolling rally that's designed to get information. There's no journalistic value to it. So, but I don't, unless the state found some involvement of Karen in setting up that rolling rally, I'm not so sure. So let me let me get this document now, and we'll pull it up. It's a long document, so I'm not sure how useful this will be. I'm going to download it. Give me a moment. All right. All right. So I got it open. Let me bring it on the screen. And it's the affidavit. All right. Sorry, I opened the wrong one. All right, so here's the document here. Make sure you guys can see it. Okay, let's see if we get anything. This is just to give you an idea how long this document is. It's a long document, so obviously I am not going to read all of this to you guys. So we'll just scroll through and see if we see anything interesting on it. It is intended for use. Let's see. To the sheriffs of our several counties, of their deputies, any state police officer or any constable or police officer within our Commonwealth, proof by affidavit, which is hereby incorporated for reference. So probable cause that these phones were used for a crime. There's 2 Apple iPhones involved. This is signed by Brian Tully. Now, my preference would be that the state could get somebody different than Brian Tully to be involved in this, just because there's a perception that he might be biased because of the accusations from Turtle Boy. But because this is a different case, Brian's in charge of the murder investigation of John O'Keefe. It seems to me that this is a separate investigation. This involves there's a grand jury, as we know. Well, let's just say we know that there's a grand jury that's been seated to look into Turtle Boy and Karen. We know this from Turtle Boy saying it on the stand, if nothing else. So it's open for us to talk about. It would be better if they had somebody independent, I think, to do this, but that's not in any way questioning his integrity. Not at all. Just perception, really. All right, so they actually go into the case against Karen. The case against Karen. So John O'Keefe was found unresponsive. Front one. Lead investigator is Trooper Michael Proctor. Keep this in. All right, so Trooper Proctor testified before the grand jury and continued, that he means the state grand jury, and continues to conduct investigative work on the case. So the feds have something on Michael Proctor. It's unlikely because they would have put him on. They would have sent what's called a targeted letter to Proctor for him to testify before the federal grand jury. And the way they do that, and they do it for that reason, a copy goes to the state police and they would put him on leave until he's either cleared or indicted. Michael Proctor is married to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is not a witness in the investigation, but a family member. So I'm assuming that this is some of the intimidation here is going to include that. During the investigation, let's see. So the police talked to Matt McCabe, Jen McCabe, Ryan Albert, Julie Albert, Chris Albert. Colin Albert was interviewed by investigators. Louis Nagel. In an April 2023 motion, says past April, filed by Reed's attorneys. All right, so this shows how that was the point when the defense was able to get their theory, or at least the one they had at the time, into the public domain. It was during a motion to get Brian Albert's phone. And it's at that time that they alleged police misconduct and a conspiracy among the civilian witnesses to frame Karen for the death of John. So you see, that's how how it's kind of cool to see how the legal aspect of it, how they could get that into the public domain. Local blogger Turtle Boy has adopted the defense's claims. Now, does anybody really doubt that? Did you really doubt that even back in April? And there are questions of honesty here too. And this false equivalency that always comes. Someone to say, well, Kev, you reported that the feds found no true bill as part of their investigation. That was not a lie. That was the best information that I had at the time. But Aiden telling us over and over again all summer that he had no direct contact with Karen or her attorneys was a lie that was repeated over and over. His contact was extensive. The social media accounts include TB Daily News, 33,000 followers. He's doing pretty good. Beginning on April 18th, began posting on his website and social media the defense allegations as true and makes personal attacks on civilian witnesses, members of their family, and their friends. Kearney authors and publishes a blog on the website TB Daily News. Oh, so he goes into a couple episodes here. Below is a small selection of verbal statements made. So in one of them, episode 594, he says, "This is not my last trip to Canton. I will be back. I'll be back. Get used to this. These people think that I'm fucking around. You haven't seen the last of me. Get used to it. Get used to it." And another episode, he says, "This guy, Chris Albert, has his head on the swivel looking for turtle riders," meaning he's scared or intimidated. "I got bad news for you, Chris. I got really bad news for you. They are literally everywhere. You guys should just stop going out in public. You guys should just stop going out in public. It's only going to get worse from here. I know where you all were today. I know where you all were today. You were in Agawam, weren't you?" So he's got his spies out there, and they're telling him, going to intimidate you unless you change your testimony. You guys are at some sort of Little League thing in Agawam. So they're even following these people when they go to kids' games. He said, he continued, "All you people were Alberts, McCabe's, you were all there. Just know that there will be no life as normal is over. Life as normal. You had normal for a while there from January 29th to about April. You guys literally got away with murder." All right. So again, he doesn't just, that's what's charged here. But I'm going to tell you, as a strategy, it's what they do. A couple of weeks ago, when Young Jerks, Mike Crawford, tried to do a video where he said he was going to try to take a different tone and look objectively at both sides. And then even though he came out right away with trying to continue arguing for the conspiracy, he did have a tone of saying, I'm going to ask questions from now on. And Turtle Boy from jail sent out through either Altman or Healy to his blog saying there will be no amnesty for Kevin Lenihan, that's me, and or the young jerks, that's Mike Crawford, because he wavered. And that's, he said, there's no wavering is allowed. And he made clear to any other YouTube producers, no wavering. The internet is forever, he said. And he's implying, I've got my mob. It's big, it's powerful, it's ruthless, and it's built on an empire of dirt, because it's built on the idea of we can embarrass you and shame you. And so that's what they do. So continuing on with this warrant, we are getting to them. He's talking about Chris and other witnesses. When you act this way, that's like a green light for me. Time to hit the gas. So when you say I'm getting to you, again, it's hard to argue the journalistic merit for that. I guess you could say the journalist, you're going to come clean and tell us, but that's not what he wants. He wants to change your testimony. That's witness intimidation. I got pictures of you. You can't leave the fucking country. Turtle Riders, we're going to find you. They're going to find you. You can't hide anymore. Your private life is officially over. Over. Dude, how is that anything short of witness intimidation? There is no sane way that some objective person can say that that is not witness intimidation. There's no sane way. You can't hide anymore. Your private life is officially over. You leave your house, you're going to have your picture taken. Smear you. We're going to smear you. That's how they operate. So you need to get used to the new normal, your new normal. Turtle Riders are going to take pictures of you and they're going to send it to me. That's what they do. We need to accelerate it. The woman who recorded video of Chris Albert's confrontation, are doing a fantastic job with this. So there is a level of conspiracy here. Not talking about the legal definition, but I think that comes into play, where the people that are working for him understand that the goal is to hound these people until they change their testimony. So I don't think it's impossible. If they're going to charge conspiracy here, anybody involved with that, I'd be a little nervous. Anybody, I hate to say it, but anybody taking pictures or video, organizing the rolling rally, I'd think about lawyering up. I said from the beginning, I don't want this to go to trial. The only way to do that is to change people's testimony. Either you get them to change their testimony or say they refuse to testify, but that's the same thing. That comes under witness intimidation. Since April 23rd, he's traveled to Canton on several occasions. On one occasion, he went to D&E Pizza. Chris has been interviewed by investigators, so that makes him a witness. During the visit, he confronted Chris, later stated on a video posted on his channel asked his followers to confront Chris Albert, order food there with the intent of not paying for it. It's interesting because one of the aspects of intimidation, if you look for the definition, Grant talked about it on the show, is economic damage. So Turtle Boy was trying to wasn't just saying boycott D&E. He was saying order food and don't pay for it. That's, man, you can't avoid this. This is definitely intimidation. Chris stated that he has had a vast increase in the number of telephone orders. All right, so and according to Chris, this worked, that he has had a vast increase in the number of telephone orders not picked up or paid for since Kearney made these statements on YouTube. Now, as I talked about, every small business lives on the margin. And that's a pizza place, a sub shop. It lives on the margin. They all do, unless you own a chain of them. Even a chain is like that. So and God bless any of these small businesses that managed to survive the pandemic. And it looks like D&E Pizza managed to do it somehow. But they're trying to destroy his business. No journalistic purpose to that. There's no journalistic purpose. And you're using your website and your channel as a weapon and purely for intimidation, your mob purely for intimidation with no journalistic value at all. He posted on his blog, on his website regarding Chris Albert. The video contains him confronting Chris. Let's keep this up. He said, I was so proud to see Turtle Riders unafraid, continue confronting evil like this in the flesh. The fact that he is still going to places like the waterfall is because he feels comfortable doing so. But murderers and those who cover for them do not deserve to live a comfortable life while Karen Read suffers and fights for injustice, for the justice of John O'Keefe. Again, there is, just to remind people, Chris was not at 34 Fairview. Chris was the one who invited John to the waterfall earlier in the day. And as proof that John and Chris are friends, it's John took his nephew to the waterfall, and that's when he was invited. That wouldn't happen if there was a feud going on between these families. There was no feud. It was made up by Karen. The evidence is that, and it will be shown at the trial, but the DA Morrissey had no reason to lie about this when he held his press conference saying that Colin was not there at the time. And I don't think it's the odds of that being wrong or disproved are astronomical. So we know that Jen's daughter, Allie, was called for a ride to pick up Colin. Colin had been there at Brian Jr.'s birthday party before. And he was walking in the driveway out of the house just as Brian Abbott was just getting home. Brian was the first to get back from the waterfall. You can imagine you get there before your guests, right? Because they were having the after hours party. So 2 separate parties. You got the birthday party for Brian Jr. earlier, and then that's ending. And then you have the people getting together for an after hours party. And so some of the guests that were still there were left over, such as Julia Nagel and the Levinson girl. I think it's Sarah, but I'm not sure about the name. They were guests of Brian Jr.'s, and so you had some crossing of both groups being there, but a small number of people in the house. And Colin was not on that, and this is proven by the data. In addition to knowing what time Allie's message was to Brian saying, I'm here outside, but we know they left because Allie had tracking data on her phone. And you're going to find this out. So Colin, whatever you think happened in the house, it didn't involve Colin. So meanwhile, you got this half-crazed group trying to smear them as murderers. I mean, you should not be smearing someone as a murderer unless you really have solid evidence. Now, if you want to raise questions in a case and say, well, we should look at so-and-so, okay. But you're out calling for the destruction of someone's life based on no evidence. The only evidence that they had that based on was that initially, when Canton police interviewed Brian Albert, he didn't mention Colin was there. And later on, that was found suspicious. And neighbor Tom Beatty was apparently the one to tell private investigators for Karen's team that Colin was there. Now, I can understand why looking at the surface, oh, that's suspicious. But at this point, we now know that he wasn't there. All right. And why did Brian lie about that? He didn't lie, but why did he lie about that? Well, when you're asking him, he had no reason to include Colin in that list because he wasn't at the after hours party. And Brian never saw him in the house that night. And he was gone. I don't know the exact time, but it looks like at least 5 minutes before Karen and John pulled up. So roughly, let's call it 5 minutes. So on June 13th, he broadcast on YouTube. He displayed call detail records of Jennifer McCabe from the day John was killed, which included phone numbers, names associated with the phone number. These records had previously been attached to a defense motion. All right, so this is where I think it sounds like where the conspiracy aspect comes into it. So Turtle Boy releases these records. I'm not sure if they'll be able to prove that a purpose was for the public to have those numbers, but that stuff came from Karen. I don't think those materials were not publicly available. So that's where Karen gets brought into this. And then he makes another one of the calls to Julie, Chris Albert's wife. And I don't think I need to read that whole paragraph, but so Chris stated he received a phone call. All right, there's another long goes into it. On July 26th, Yuri Buchanan of the Massachusetts Police interviewed Colin Albert regarding harassment he has received from Kearney and his followers. Colin Albert is the son of Chris, then 17 at the time. Kearney posted on Twitter a statement alleging Colin Albert is responsible for the murder of John O'Keefe, specifically stating Colin and O'Keefe were in a fistfight at 34 Fairview. Since that post, Kearney authored several additional posts about Colin. I want to say, too, that I believe July 26th, possibly July 25th, was the day that it was falsely reported on my channel, to my everlasting shame, that John had called the Canton police on Colin for drug dealing. I was definitely told that by my source. There's no question. I put together a script, sent it to him for approval. He initially approved the script completely, and then shortly before the show, I wanted to go by a script because I wanted to choose the language very carefully. And all summer I had refused to say Colin's name. I just said the nephew, and I was really doubtful about this theory because I didn't. And I was really sensitive to trying to smear a young man. And I was doubtful that a 17-year-old kid whose uncle is a cop, both his uncles are cops, is going to attack a Boston cop, a 6'2" Boston cop. It just never struck me as rational or reasonable or likely. But this seemed to make the way this was presented to me happen. It seemed to tie things together. We now know that it was false, but because at the same time I was told, not only that John called on Colin's drug dealing, but also that the DEA, and this source said he had a source that was still working for the DEA, that there was an active investigation going on into the Canton Police Department. So and in fact, the chief Rafferty responded to that eventually by saying, well, she didn't respond to that claim, but she responded angrily to the fact to confirm that there was a call, but it didn't involve Colin. And that turned out to be the truth. So the story about of John calling the police on Colin was a lie. It was a lie. All right. I believe in the truth. I will try to protect sources as much as I can, but it's a lie. The source, I'm not saying the source lied to me. I'm saying the source he may have been fooled. He may have been lied to. I presume that's the case. He has since told me what his actual source was for this, and that it was a police officer in the building. I'm skeptical. I believe the source might have been the same source as the person who seems to have invented the idea that Colin was caught drinking on the lawn by John and Karen. And that when he was out drinking with teens, the Ring video woke them up, and John went out there and Colin said, "Fuck you," and had an argument with him. Again, according to Gretchen Voss, the writer for Boston Magazine, who was able to research this much more professionally and diligently and reliably, it was not Colin. So we'll see to what extent that might be proved in trial, but it seems to me pretty clear. I did this as soon as I understood this, I put out a video called The Anatomy of a Smear, and you can check it out. I think that was out in maybe October. And so it seems pretty clear who made it up and why. So you're trying to create a third party culprit theory here to explain now who could have killed John in the house, but it helps to come up with a motive. You don't want to just say, John was out drinking with the guys and he was invited back to the house and boys will be boys. They got in a fight. They got out of hand. You could say that, but it was much easier to say that there was a motive. And so they tried to create this feud between Colin and John that doesn't seem to, in reality, have ever existed. And in order to look for substance to do that, she took a real incident, the Ring video that recorded kids drinking on the lawn, and inserted Colin into that incident. That seems to have been what happened. Now, so to me, once I pieced this together later, and at the time I did not know my source was communicating regularly and directly, not only with Karen Reed, but with her attorneys. He didn't tell me that then. So I have reason to suspect that she or they were the source of this. Again, I don't know that. I'm just suspecting. And he did not claim that. He claimed there was an officer inside Canton Police Department. So that's the truth of how it went down. You can take it and piece it together from there and do your own analysis and decide who made that up. But to me, it seems that it was all part of trying to craft this implausible third-party culprit theory. And at the same time, or within a couple of weeks of that, Alan Jackson went on, I believe it was Dateline, and he said something unusual because it really blended in with what was going on. Sorry, I got a message there, but it really blended in what was being fed to me. So what Alan Jackson said to Dateline was that they believed that John went into a hostile environment in that house and that he was, quote, set up. This just happened to gel perfectly with the theory that was being fed to me that the reason John was invited out with them and to the house was kind of like a mafia sit down. If this was, the Alberts are not a mafia family, but think of it that way. If they were a mafia family, we're going to do a sit down where we settle all business, and you're called to a sit down. You have no choice. If you're part of a mafia family and you're called to a sit down by the boss or one of the captains, you got no choice. You got to go in. If you don't go in, they're going to kill you. And if you do go in, they might kill you, but you have no choice. You have to go. And they created a scenario where this is what they were trying to suggest happened here. And that's why John went there. And that's why it was a hostile environment. And that's why he was set up, that he was called in to settle things here where this fictional crime family known as the Albert crime family was going to lay down the law. No more calling the police on Colin. It was all crazy, but this is where it's reasonable for defense to establish a third-party culprit theory. But when you start smearing people with fiction, I don't know what the legal line is, but there's a lot of protection that is given to a lot of freedom is given to defense attorneys to do that, but you've certainly crossed an ethical line to do that, and that's been crossed here many times in many serious ways. So let me continue reading this. So Buchanan interviewed Colin. Oh, I already read that. So next one. So on 15. So on July 8th, Kearney broadcast on YouTube saying, "Yo, Colin, it's Turtle Boy." Oh, he actually called Colin. Now, I don't know if we'll keep reading and find out where he got these phone numbers, but he called Colin. "Yo, Colin, it's Turtle Boy from them Advantage boys. Bang, bang, bang. Yo, we'll fuck any of you dogs up. Yo, you challenged my boys, them Advantage boys, to a fight, dog. And we about that life, son. We about that life. And we from Sharon, son. Y'all, Canton bitches ain't so hot. Us Sharon bitches are Advantage boys. Nobody is fucking with us and shit, dog." I don't want to keep reading this. This is stupid. But obviously, gets to what the purpose of the channel was. And the purpose for Turtle Boy presenting this defense theory is entertain. It's high entertainment. It's entertainment. And this is, when I first watched these calls back in April, I was totally new to it. And without understanding, without judging, we all have to go through a process of understanding that what's going on here is wrong. It's a process. And it doesn't happen instantly. Maybe for some people, it didn't for me, and other people have a longer process. But, I was like looking at this stuff and saying, well, this is entertaining, but it was a little squeamish, but over time I realized it was wrong and it was cruel. And you're taking pleasure in other people's misery. That's what that was built about. And it was making thousands of dollars for Aiden Kearney. That was the purpose of it. So at whatever point it took you to realize that it was wrong, give yourself a little forgiveness if you were slow to do it. I'm being forgiving of myself. It took me a few weeks. Maybe some people it took longer, but you should have realized it by now that what you were seeing was cruel. All right. Colin stated to Buchanan that the intimidation he has received has made him sad, scared, and paranoid. He fears physical harm. All right. So this is showing the damage aspect of it. Later on, another episode, I'm trying to put her godson / nephew in jail and, kind of like destroy their life. A little bit more talking about Jen and Matt McCabe. Jen and Matt McCabe do not deserve to live a normal life and pretend that they weren't involved in murdering a Boston police officer. You're saying this stuff with no evidence and people that have never committed crimes before. The only purpose is cruelty and entertainment and making money. While the McCabes were seated in the stands, we've all seen this famous episode where he brought a camera crew up there and made a spectacle of harassing Jen McCabe while her husband was there. And her husband was polite enough not to throw him off the bleachers, which he could have. But doesn't seem to be that he's that kind of guy. But it was clear harassment. It was no journalistic purpose. And it was done with their daughters playing lacrosse down on the field. And again, more with the lies. He tried to lie later and say that his camera crew, he didn't bring a camera crew. That was just some guy that happened to be filming there. And he just happened to put it on the internet later that night. Come on. How many times does this guy have to lie to you people before you realize it? Do you just get to say an infinite number of lies? I don't know. I don't get it. But so he traveled to their home on June 26th. Video recorded his arrival at the residence and later discussed the trip in a YouTube video. So I'm not sure if that was the date of the rolling rally. It sounds about like that time. On September 20th, Aiden repeatedly stated that Jen McCabe killed John O'Keefe. He says, I am saying this as a matter of fact that Jen McCabe participated in killing and planning to kill and cover up the murder of John O'Keefe. I am saying that. This is not my opinion. Even if you have questions about this case and you think some of the investigation was maybe not quite on the up and up, or there's questions that you haven't seen answered yet and hopefully will be answered at the trial, that's insane. It's just dishonest. And I don't know, decent people wouldn't fall for that. Sorry. You killed John O'Keefe, you worthless piece of shit. And I'm going to fine you, motherfucker. I'm going to fine you. He later in the video, he displayed a sign on the lawn of Jennifer McCabe's sister in Canton. So I'm not sure if he's talking about the sister or there's more discussion of these videos. If I read through all of this, it'll take a long time. All right. So the next one goes to someone who is not a witness in the case. This is to Elizabeth. Oh, I should probably, that shows where she works. Let me get through that. So during a podcast in May, he talks about Elizabeth. This is Michael Proctor's wife. He stated he was going to call her. He repeated her cell phone number on the broadcast as he was entering the number into cell phone. Now, it does seem to me that that's. Oh, let me. Shit. I should have redacted this. I should have read through this to redact this to block this stuff out. Hi, Elizabeth. This is Aiden Kearney calling you back from Turtle Boy. We briefly spoke yesterday on the phone. I introduced myself. I noticed that you're, so again, you're trying to intimidate. Now, in this case here, she's not a witness, so not sure how this figures in legally. It's talking about the billboard going up. It's really important for people in Norfolk County to know about this story because that is where the jury pool will be chosen from. So he's trying to, the state has put this in bold. They're highlighting this. I'm not sure if it's legal. I'm not sure if it's illegal for Turtle Boy to try to influence the jury pool, but it probably would be illegal for Karen to do that. So maybe that's why. Again, this is a warrant for her phone. So Kearney organized and publicized the Rolling Road Rally, where protesters would travel to the homes of witnesses on July 22nd. So at the beginning of the video, Kearney is operating a motor vehicle and stated at least 100 to 200 people are in the caravan of vehicles. He further stated he did not broadcast the locations of the protests prior to the departure of the rolling rally. So he had the addresses and they were following him, and he was purposely leading them there. The first address they went to was at where Brian Albert was living at the time. During the video, Kearney stated the purpose of the rally is to protest a murder cover-up and framing of an innocent woman. He stated some witnesses will be in jail within a year and brags about being able to locate the witnesses wherever they travel. And again, this is where it goes into his mob does have a lot of people that work in positions that can trace license plates and do stuff that get access to information they shouldn't have access to. But this is the nature of the mob. They use the megaphone. There's a picture here. I do know that the state police set up cameras at all the houses. So it's going to be much better documented in the trial. Oh, it says it here. In the days leading up to July 2nd, cameras were placed outside of several of the locations. So I guess it's several of the locations, not all of them, where the protest was scheduled to occur. There's a video of people walking there. I'm told I'm not supposed to mention it anymore because people get sick of it, but they were spitting in the driveways at each stop. They went to the Proctor's home. And that says that day they were there with their 2 young children. Oh, but they vacated their home because of the protest. So the Proctors would have been there with their 2 young children, but they vacated the home because of the protest. So they were forced out by this rolling rally. During the speech, Kearney continually. So here's another photo. So I think maybe the purpose of these photos is also to show that this was not just a matter of cars driving through. There's quite a bit of people getting out of the cars. So very intimidating thing. And I've talked to different people that were in the houses and that in some of the houses that had children in them. And yeah, it was designed to be a terrifying act. And I'm not saying as an act of terrorism, but definitely an act of intimidation that was designed to create terror. Looks like similar. They're just going through and describing similar events at each house. But they're out there with a bullhorn. They're filming this. These are narrow streets. So Julie Nagel is age 25, and her crime is simply saying that she never saw John go in the house, which we now know is completely backed up by GPS. But for that crime, she had her life completely disrupted by this this event that was designed to create terror and intimidation. He described, so Kearney made a statement to get the attention of the neighbors of Highland Street. He described how O'Keefe was beaten to death at a house where Julie was present. He stated, at any point, Julie Nagel, you can come out at any point, Julie. Nothing is stopping you from telling the truth. You know what happened. So again, he's stating right there that she needs to come out and change her testimony. You can't get away with it anymore. Too many people know you are going down with them. Nothing is stopping you from coming forward and telling the police what happened. I guess they're going to maybe try to argue, Bradel, that that's journalistic. But he's not saying come out and tell me what happened. He's saying come out and tell people what happened. So he's trying to get them to change their testimony. You might as well tell the truth and let the world know what happened. Neighbors, maybe you guys can help us pressure them into this. So see, he's trying to get the neighbors into pressure these people. Says Julie Nagel was involved in the murder of the police officer. She knows what happened and she is actively involved in the cover-up. She would not be able to walk around town like none of this happened. No, I'm sorry. Let me repeat that. This is, again, Turtle talking. She should not be able to walk around town like none of this happened while an innocent woman named Karen Reed suffers the consequences of her silence and her complicity. The truth will set you free. So this is what he was saying through his bullhorn in front of the house. Then they stopped at Deputy Chief Kelleher's house. Now this is good size of the mob here. Looks like that might be 34 Fairview. I'm not sure, but the deputy chief lived across the street. You can see this mob is blocking traffic. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people. This is all right. So let's get this. Maybe there's something interesting here. Information subsequent to the arrest of Aiden. So Tully interviewed Natalie, who I've talked to you about, in California. He flew out there, got her devices. Natalie went to college with Karen. She returned to college, lost touch with Karen, and got back in touch with her through this case. In April 2023, Natalie noticed a woman by the name of Jennifer Altman, attorney Jennifer Altman, on social media who was defending Karen and comments of news reports regarding Karen's criminal case. Natalie stated she contacted Jennifer on Facebook in order to thank her for supporting Karen. Jennifer responded that she has a friend, Aiden Kearney, who runs a blog and would like to report on Karen's criminal case. During this text message conversation on April 13th. So that's the beginning. So Turtle Boy's first story is on April 18th, and the first contact seems to have been April 13th. So he researched this for 4 or 5 days. Natalie sent the following message to Jennifer. The feds are involved. Fascinating to have this in this warrant. This is amazing. Natalie sent the following message to Jennifer. The feds are involved, and described how people involved were going down. Natalie spoke to Karen about Kearney. The following day, Karen told Natalie she would like Kearney to report on the case. So that was, we've seen many of these messages were made public on Twitter not because of a leak, but because Natalie had given these messages beforehand to other sources besides the police. So on April 17th, Natalie was put into so I'm sorry. So all right. So Kearney was made aware of the case on April 13th, but those early messages must have went just through attorney Jen Altman. And then on April 17th, so that's just the day before the article was published, Natalie was put into contact for the first time through Aiden, through Jennifer, through Altman. Natalie exchanged messages with Kearney and spoke with him on the phone about Karen's case. So just so people understand, so that's how it worked. Natalie was the go-between in those days for several weeks. I'm not sure if we'll get to what it says here, but not long after this, Aiden was in direct contact with. I'm not sure. We'll see. But not long after this, Aiden was in direct contact with Alan Jackson and David Yannetti. I'm not sure if it's both. Let's just say the defense team. It might have just been Alan Jackson. And I believe they had dinner at the Omni in May. And by the mid-May, Karen began communicating directly with Aiden over the encryption app Signal. And that's why soon after that, she jettisoned Natalie because she no longer needed her. Shortly after Karen agreed to work with Kearney, Karen instructed Natalie to download, there we go, the messaging app Signal on her phone, which she did. So they were just basically pasting messages back and forth between Karen and Aiden. On April 22nd, Natalie messaged Aiden saying, "We are all very grateful to you." And Kearney responded, "It's my job. Glad to help." I think the state, I don't know if they're going to try to go with an idea that that Aiden was being paid, and that's why he's saying it's my job. I don't think it's the case that Aiden was paid by Karen. He made his money off donations, a lot of it. Kearney, just to give you an idea, I don't know how much he made, but just to give you an idea, when Turtleboy was arrested and they put up a fund for his defense fund, just that alone took in, I think, like $78,000 or something like that within a couple of days, and then more continued to come in. So he was just get an idea how much money was being raised. There was a huge boost in paid subscribers on YouTube, and I believe his paid subscription was $15 a month. So do the math. If he had 1,000, if he had 2,000, if he had 600, I don't know. It's pretty good money. So Kearney would frequently check with Karen through Natalie. So he shared the audio file from the 911 call that was recorded on John's phone. The audio file. All right. So one other message sent by Natalie, so from Karen, basically said, "Urgent, do not publish anything from the report on Julie Nagel. Make it clear that he didn't get it from us." So they're giving him stuff and trying to be sneaky about it and say, try to make it you got it from sources. I don't know if there ever actually were any sources other than Karen Reed. I would say probably not. I don't know. I mean, eventually he did talk to Lucky, so I don't know, but he talked to Scanlon too, but I don't know how many, and even his awareness of those things came directly from the defense side. In another exchange on May 6th, he messaged 5 photographs that appear to be pictures by CSSS of Karen's car, including the taillight, and then asked, "Can you walk me through that? What are there?" So I eventually got some of these photos. Sean always talks about it, saying, "Kevin's got the evidence." He had told me not to share it, but it wasn't actually evidence of anything anyways. It just showed that at some point the taillight was removed and the private investigators went in and took pictures of it. It really doesn't mean anything unless you can show that those things were moved in the brief minutes, the few minutes that Karen's car was taken back to Canton Police, was towed there, and it arrived sometime after 5, and the pieces were found. The first main piece was found at 5:45 at the scene. So unless that piece was removed at that time, it's, which is extremely unlikely. Don't talk about those on the show tonight. All right. Make it clear he didn't just get it from us, but don't show the exhibits, just read them. So this kind of shows that. So I'm pleased tell him not to share this title. It has Unetti's initials on it. So they were trying to feed stuff that would be sent to his audience, but in a way that it would not seem like it was coming from the defense. So they were worried about getting in trouble on that. Stuff about making the t-shirts. His another message says, I won't use any grand. The state has this in bold. I won't use any grand jury testimony. The formatting is obvious, different from the police reports. So I guess the implication here is that they sent, let me see if they seem to have sent the grand jury testimony to Aiden. That's a pretty big no-no. Looks like maybe it was Julie Nagel's testimony. So they wanted him to read it, but not show it. On several occasions, this is back in the beginning, Aiden questions Karen's defense theories. He did, and he's a smart guy, and he was rigorously questioning this stuff. And had he been interested in the truth and not just building this being his big opportunity, he would have got to the truth. He would have got to it. Everybody does if you ask enough questions and look at the evidence enough. You're going to see more of that coming up soon in the trial, certainly. All right. During the interview, Natalie discussed a May 3rd court date for Karen's criminal case. Kearney requested for someone to save him a seat in the courtroom. All right. Nothing wrong with that. Natalie recalled Kearney being invited to have lunch with Karen and her defense attorneys, including Jackson and Unetti, after the May 3rd court date. So again, it was late August or early September when I had an episode where I had kind of, people like to call it the outburst episode, where I got angry at Turtle for bringing his mob into my chat. And his main accusation against me that I was both sides. He accused me of both sidesism. He didn't like anybody asking questions. And when I said that he's working directly with the defense, he insisted he wasn't, as he had been insisting all summer, but he was. Karen and her team will likely be convening at the Omni Seaport after May 3rd. So Kenny responded, I'd be happy to meet up with them. And this, again, there's nothing wrong with meeting up. I mean, that's good. Meet up with a source, get the information, but be objective. Understand that it's a defense team that's trying to float a theory, and then be honest with your audience. Or at least don't lie to them. If you don't want to tell them where you got it, that's fine. But don't, I don't really understand how anybody could think he wasn't in direct contact with these people. I never understood. I always thought that. I always assumed it. And then there's messages here saying Kearney agreed and stated he was going to attend the lunch, and then later said he had a great time. So clearly they had a nice lunch together. On May 6th, he wanted to see the hairs and she showed me in person. I don't make a joke about that. I'm sure that's a picture of hairs related to the case. Sent 2 pictures of what appeared to be a hair next to a measuring tape. A check in the text messages from Natalie's phone reveals several instances where it appears Kearney communicated directly with attorneys Alan Jackson and David Unetti. And I can say on I think it was July 29th, July 30th, Aiden contacted me saying that Alan Jackson wanted to get in touch with me, and he gave me Alan Jackson's cell phone number. I texted Alan Jackson saying, I did what I listen. I don't call myself a professional journalist, but I did what you'd want a professional journalist to do. I texted Alan Jackson saying, I understand. I wonder if I still have that on my phone. I could read that to you, what I said. You might be interested in it. Yeah, I got this. All right. So I said, hi. Yeah, this is again, I was requested to get in touch with him. I said, hi, this is Kevin from the YouTube channel Yellow Cottage Tales. Aiden Kearney passed along that you wanted to talk to me. And I gave him my email. I said, tomorrow I am busy doing a documentary shoot until the evening. You are welcome to call me after or email. I doubt I have any provable evidence that would help your client. I am neutral as far as the case. But if I had evidence, I'd turn over, and obviously I would. If you watched last night's show at any point other than the beginning, you can see who my primary source was. Basically just goes on with others, nothing that interesting. But basically, I said, you know, I'm going to be neutral. I'm going to cover the case neutrally, and I don't think that that's what they wanted, unfortunately, for them. That was the date. That was on August 24th. No, I'm sorry. It was not. It was on July 31st. Yep, July 31st. And he said, thanks, Kevin. Sorry for the late hour. I'll be traveling tomorrow, but I would like to touch base Wednesday if possible. That's the only contact I had. A month or so later, I messaged him to say I was preparing a scripted episode talking about Rich Green versus I can't remember for the moment. I'm having a brain fart and I can't remember the name of the Jessica Hyde. So I wanted to compare the qualifications of the independent expert hired by the prosecution called Jessica Hyde and compare her to Rich Green. And I could not find anything on Rich Green. And I had other people working with me at the time, such as Erin, who has some research tools, and Dave. None of us could find anything on Rich Green. We didn't know anything about him. What other cases he'd done? He was a mystery man. We couldn't find anything. So I reached out to Alan and said, can you please send, if you have anything showing his qualifications, send me that. He didn't reply. So let's get back, since I'm getting hungry, and let's get to the document. All right. So scrolling down, there were several instances. On May 2nd, Natalie sent Kearney the message, Colin has a lawyer. Asking Eddie about it. On May 5th, this is interesting. All right. I can tell you more about this, and we'll see if this can be covered here. Tell Turtle Boy so this is Natalie sent Aiden a message. This will be from Karen. Be strong, Aiden. Get down for a day, but wake up and keep fighting tomorrow. Please call Alan and spitball your issues with him if you want to. Nothing gives you a shot in the arm like talking to AJ. And Natalie, all right, this is important. This last part. I had reported most of this before to you, but I couldn't confirm. All right, so what was going on was Turtle Boy was having a separate legal matter involving someone with a claim against him in Rhode Island. This was a felony witness charge, and Turtle Boy was down. He was depressed. He was really worried about this charge. And so he reached out to Karen through Natalie to see if anything can be done. And I have really, there's more messages on this that I've revealed, but so tell TB from me, be strong, Aiden, get down for a day, but wake up and keep fighting. So she said to contact AJ, Alan Jackson. Obviously, she didn't have to give him the cell phone number because he already had it. And then Natalie later asked, did you call him? And Aiden replied, just did. So on May 5th, Aiden called Alan Jackson to help out with a separate legal matter. Now, I can tell you that within a few days, the witness in Rhode Island with a complaint against him got a call from an FBI agent named Samuel Weiner. And that agent scared the living crap out of this witness. And to this day, as far as I know, the case was dropped. So if you want to believe that's a coincidence, okay. But is there a connection to that, to the Josh Levy situation? Maybe not. But Josh Levy is the U.S. attorney. That's federal, FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those are the agents they use. But there may have been some other reason that the FBI stepped in. Maybe Turtle personally knows this. Maybe Alan Jackson, not Turtle, but Alan Jackson knows this particular agent. Maybe Alan Jackson called someone who knows him. All right, so more on that. So on May 7th, Kearney stated he disagrees with Alan Jackson's theory of when O'Keefe was allegedly moved to the front line. Oh, this is really interesting too, because we didn't know exactly how this changed, but in the early days, they were saying that John was moved out probably right after 1:30. And then by the June hearing, the defense seemed to be suggesting later, and Turtle was saying sometime around 4:30. So Kearney wrote, keep in mind, Karen, that Alan Jackson and myself don't officially talk. Obviously they talk. It would be normal for me to have opinions that differ from the defense, although we all agree that Karen had nothing to do with it. I made it clear that my theory of how he died is simply that, a theory. If there's more information I haven't been given that can prove my theory is wrong, I'm all ears. And Natalie said, I hear you. It's good not to be completely in sync. We are open to new theories. That's smart. That's true. In public settings, Kearney and the attorneys for Karen Reed have denied communicating. As I told you, lied or mischaracterized the nature of their communication. On September 27th, Boston Magazine published an article about the homicide of John O'Keefe. And for the article, the author interviewed Karen, her attorneys, and Aiden Kearney. The article describes Kearney's involvement in the case from April through July. After describing how the author interviewed Kearney at his residence, the article states both Kearney and Reed's defense team say they have never been in contact with one another. So there you go. Both Karen and her lawyer, both Karen and Aiden lied about the direct communications. All right? There it is right there. They're both liars. They're both liars about essential things here. And it doesn't mean she killed him, but it's time to start processing these things. On April 20th, a Twitter account associated with Yannetti posted a response to another post alleging that Yannetti tipped off Kearney about the story. that post in part reads, he and I never communicated until after his first piece on the Karen Reed case. Well, I do think that he's telling the truth on that. He's not. Most of the time, these guys aren't stupid enough to lie. He doesn't strike me as a stupid man, and he's saying that their communication was after April 18th, which is very different than what Karen and Aiden told Gretchen Voss. I observed, this is Tully, I observed text messages between Natalie and Kearney containing discussions about an investigation being conducted by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. On one such occasion, on April 23rd, an April 23rd message sent from Natalie to Aiden said, "Not public. The feds have been involved longer than anyone is likely guessing." I can tell you that I've seen the message that it goes back to August of 2022. On April 28th, Natalie sends Kearney the following message. But I don't understand why he doesn't mention more that the feds are involved. The first U.S. attorney, they don't shoot and miss. They have a case and way more evidence than we do. I know this for a fact. Jen McCabe testifies this coming week. I'm not sure about the others. So, that is also extremely interesting. Wow. That is a wow. You guys, did you catch that? So if that's true, and it seems to me that it is, there's a secret federal grand jury, and not much is more secret than that, right? Wow. But somehow Karen knows when Jen McCabe is testifying before a federal grand jury. And she says, "I'm not sure about the others." So somebody connected to the feds is communicating to the defense that Jen McCabe is about to go before a federal grand jury. Listen, there is major misconduct going on here by the feds. Major. It's even if it turns out there's a cover-up, which there's not going to, but that's improper. There's something highly irregular and improper going on here. I know Josh had a big press conference this week demonstrating they took down some state troopers. Think about why that. You think it's a coincidence that happened this week? I don't think so. They know there's serious trouble coming, folks, about what the feds were doing here. Why would they, if the feds think that they had a reason to suspect the investigation was corrupt, okay. But why are they telling Karen Reed? It's something, this not only something as sensitive as a federal grand jury, but something as sensitive as a federal grand jury into the corruption of a murder case, corruption potentially by state police and by the DA. That would be the most classified thing going on in law in the region. Something is extremely improper if that's being communicated. Now, we don't know that it was being communicated by Josh Levy, but it does seem to be an unusual level of communication directly from Josh Levy. Maybe there's another mole in the office. I don't know, but that's extremely unusual. And it's not going to be enough for the feds to come out next week, as we expect, and say, yeah, we looked into it, didn't find anything. No, there needs to be a full accounting here of how they interfered in this case. Now, if they come out and they show compelling evidence that there was a cover-up, okay, I'll accept that, presuming that the evidence is compelling. But if they come out next week, as I expect, and say, yeah, we didn't find anything, that can't be enough. You have to get to the bottom here. Something was foul here. Kearney responds later on April 28th. Has there been any new information about the FBI investigation and handing out of subpoenas? Natalie responded, no new info, just that they already presented the case to the grand jury as we speak. And the DA's office has been informed. This is confirmed 1,000%. In late 2023, this is a kind of footnote in parentheses by Tully. In late April 2023, the DA's office was notified by the U.S. Attorney's Office that the witness involved were served with subpoenas. So that confirms that what Natalie was saying was true. So there was either a mole or something very improper going on where Karen's team was being told of this stuff. And because of this, you can even understand and sympathize where Turtle Boy got duped because of what was going on here. It was highly irregular. In a later exchange, Natalie wrote to Kearney, bingo was in reference that you got, I think she meant got, that you got the names of the attorney's office correct. And Kearney responded, oh, she spoke to David, I'm guessing, meaning Yannetti. So you're having direct communication going on. So that looks there like Yannetti is the contact to the feds. We haven't known whether it was Jackson or Yannetti, or both, but that seems to indicate that Yannetti was the direct contact to the Fed's office. And wondering how this the federal investigation began here, it looks, I would guess based on that Yannetti walked into the office, maybe knows people there and says, we got something here you got to look at. On May 5th, Kearney stated he heard a rumor that 20 FBI agents were seen in Canton for possible arrests. Boy, this has been going on since May, people seeing black helicopters in Canton. 2 days later, Natalie sent Kearney a message that contained in part, not public, Levy confirmed no swarms of FBI were in Canton 2 days ago. All right, so there was a rumor going around the feds, and Karen's team has this direct line of communication to Levy. There's something wrong here. This, I'm not trying to smear Levy, but there's something wrong here, and you need to get to the bottom of this. I think this guy's done. This guy's done. Eventually, the feds are going to try to weasel out of this, but they got to get to the bottom of this. This is the problem. The reference to Levy is most likely U.S. Attorney Levy. Natalie sent Kearney a picture of what appears to be, oh my God. Natalie sent Kearney a picture of what appears to be an organizational chart of the U.S. Attorney's office with the position of the first assistant U.S. Attorney circled in yellow. So she's making clear that's our guy. That's our guy. Our guy is the first U.S. Attorney who is, if this was a sub, that's second in command. First in command was the U.S. Attorney, Rachel Rollin. And now, since she got fired, Josh Levy is the first in command and had a big press conference this week. She says there's only one first U.S. Attorney. He does not typically prosecute, like he never prosecutes. He just delegates to the assistants within the divisions. And the main one here was an attorney named Adam Deitch. But he's running this grand jury. Levy is running it. At the May 3rd Norfolk Superior Court date, while in open court, before Judge Canone and television cameras, Alan Jackson reported federal authorities have now gotten involved in circumstances surrounding this case and have impaired a grand jury. I think it says impaled. I don't know, but it should be impaired, right? Actually, I'm not sure what it should be. Impaled the grand jury. Okay. Well, we'll read it as it is. A federal grand jury. Shouldn't it be impaneled, actually? Anyways, so a federal grand jury to investigate some of these circumstances. Following the court hearing, Jackson, Yannetti, and Karen Reed spoke to the media on the front steps of the court. And the Commonwealth later filed a motion requesting Karen's defense attorneys refrain from making extrajudicial statements. Yannetti filed a motion opposing that. In his motion, he said that it's been reported. So he talked about Jackson saying it's been reported that the feds. Yeah. All right. So big and Jackson, when I was reading that initial version of that is true. Jackson did not say. Jackson was careful to say it's been reported, and I do remember that at the hearing at the time. And my assumption was that Jackson was saying that based on the fact that it was reported by Turtle Boy. And actually, I had reported it even on my channel because the same day that I got from law enforcement contacts that Turtle was releasing this story, about the conspiracy. So April 18th, I also got messages from people from law enforcement contacts saying the FBI was involved. I wasn't reporting much on it because I didn't have anything substantial and I couldn't tell if it was real. So this statement was the defense revealing publicly that a federal grand jury had been impaneled, and he spelled it right there. Something about which the defense team would have no knowledge, and they bold and underlined that. Instead, as Jackson stated, this was Mr. Reed's counsel reiterating. So, all right, all right. So here's what you got. Oh, it was. It's interesting. So the in the motion to stop, the DA's motion to stop the defense from holding these little stunt press conferences on the stairs was based on the defense team saying that the feds were investigating this. And the defense, in the rebuttal to that, said, no, we didn't say that. We actually just said it was reported. But there's a circular argument here because the people that actually, sorry, I got a stink bug. These things come in the winter. The people that actually, so the source of that report was actually Karen's team themselves. So they told Turtle Boy that the feds were involved. Turtle Boy reported it. And then Jackson in court said, well, reports say, and then later on, Yannetti argued that we're not saying that the feds are doing, we're just saying the reports are out there, but they were the source of the reports. And the state wants you to know that now. And I do think it's important that you do. So multiple witnesses in the home where John was killed. Of course, he wasn't killed in the home. Were subpoenaed by a federal grand jury. The FBI visits the home's basement floor was reportedly replaced. Yeah, so they're talking about information that Turtle Boy had from the feds. So back then at the time, Turtle Boy said, he got angry once. He said, trust me. Just do what I prescribe and just trust me. Don't ask questions. And I think what he was talking about, if I remember right, was that the feds were investigating this. And we wondered what his source was, right? But his source was Karen. His source was Jackson Yannetti. That was his source. And so a good journalist would have also asked, all right, what else is going on here? If you're covering a case, you don't just take for granted the information that's given you by a murder suspect's defense team. But so okay, let's see more. He described the relationship with Karen's friend as follows. All right, so he said, all right, so this is Kearney on YouTube. He says that doesn't mean this is on August 29th. Okay, Karen Reed is allowed to have friends and they're allowed to talk to me. That doesn't mean I'm communicating with her or her lawyers. I tried. Oh my God, how do people fall for this? He says, I tried friend requesting Karen Reed and it came back rejected. But she's not stupid, clearly. I've asked her friend, obviously, can I talk to Karen Reed? So phony. On August 29th, after he's been talking directly to her since May and meeting with her attorneys since April, he's on his show telling his audience, well, I tried to get in touch with her. That's months later. That's your daddy. On October 30th, he appeared on a YouTube show called New Bedford Live. And he was asked if he has ever met Karen Reed. And he said, I've seen her in court. I've met her family. I talk to them, not every day or anything like that, but I've had many pleasant conversations. But Karen likes to keep a distance, I think, between herself and me, simply because they're after her, for one thing. They're after her. And number two is just, affects what God, This is the biggest phony on the internet. He makes the Glare look honest by by comparison. Oh my God. Well, I don't know about that, but he says, number two, it just, affects my professional reputation. If you know, so he's avoided, he hasn't contacted her because it would affect his professional reputation. He gets it. He understands it. If he's getting his information from the murder suspect and that's it, people would question his objectivity on this case. He gets it, so he lies. Oh my God, how does this fool people? Like if she's my BFF or something like that, but I fully support her. I think this is all over her. And he says, I think after this is all over, and I will be friends, her and I will be friends. But for now, it's about business. Several text exchanges suggest Kearney and Karen communicated directly without Natalie acting as an intermediary. We know that. These messages are in addition to the previously mentioned messages. All right, so keep in mind, they don't have the phones to look at this data yet, so they're going by indications from Natalie's messages. They have Kearney's phones, but right now they have not truly been able to go through them. That's still in a state of legal limbo. And this was before they have Karen's phones. So, and it's reported that those phones that they picked up last week were wiped. So I'm not sure what they'll be able to get from. One exchange on May 6th has Aiden disbelieving a portion of Karen's defense and is frustrated. He texted Natalie and is saying that he called her. Natalie asked 15 minutes. All right, so this is more just proof, a bunch of stuff that he called Karen, and they're just making that clear here, but everybody knows it. Karen has been interviewed by other media outlets, including ABC's Nightline and NBC's Dateline. She is interviewed by Boston Magazine. She has never acknowledged speaking with Kearney. Furthermore, she took steps to provide Kearney non-public information while appearing to be distant, including using an intermediary. So yeah, they're tricky. Following a fallout. I'm sorry, that was a tongue twister. Following a falling out between Natalie and Karen in June, the text message frequency dramatically dropped. Natalie was no longer sending Aiden the information. She was no longer in the middle. But that was the point where they just were communicating directly. A special prosecutor convened a grand jury to investigate the intimidation of witnesses involved in this. So that's, get phone numbers there. So let me skip through. I think those were Aiden's phone numbers, but we don't need those. More phone numbers. So this is just more stuff about the communications. Something about someone named Jane. I'm not even sure who this is. In December, I communicated and interviewed a witness relative to ongoing conspiracy to intimidate witnesses of the Commonwealth case. I interviewed her at a residence with another investigator, given widespread media attention. The purpose of using a pseudonym in this affidavit. So this might be referring. It's a pseudonym. So it might. Let's see. Jane stated she. Okay, so yeah. So it's not Natalie. I don't know who it is. Jane stated she met. Oh, okay. We know this is the recent victim. Phone number. So Jane, the victim, stated that they communicated using the Signal app. We all know that. She described one instance where Reed controlled what Kearney would publish. Kearney wanted to release the Canton police cruiser video footage he had obtained from Reed. Oh, I didn't know I didn't. So they had that. So he's never released it. Kearney wanted to release the Canton police cruiser video footage. He asked Reed if he could publish the video on his platform, and Reed said no. So it's never been released. Kearney was frustrated and contacted Alan Jackson. Jackson approved the release of the video. Interesting. Alan Jackson, her defense attorney, approved it. And Karen later found out that Aiden had went directly to Jackson and was angry. This is consistent with what we've seen. She likes to be in control. During a video on this November 28th, Aiden discussed the existence of video from cameras fixed to the, all right, so the police, the cruiser cams. Jane stated, I'm just getting a call. Hello? Is it an emergency? Okay. Okay, I'll be right down. All right, guys. I have a family emergency, so I am going to have to leave this, and hopefully you guys can get access to, if I can make this public, if you email me, I will get you copy this, but I have a family emergency immediately that I have to take care of. Good night.